Political calculations are constantly being made about the Russia-Ukraine war. But first we need to take a step back and look at who controls what. So let's bring up the map. You might remember that in the summer of 2024, Ukraine launched a surprise attack and captured part of Russia's Kursk region. In just 1 week, they managed to take control of over 900 square kilometers of Russian territory. However, their advance only lasted for 2 months. In September, Russia launched a counteroffensive. Thousands of troops from North Korea were also sent to support efforts to push Ukrainian forces out of Kursk. An estimated 50,000-strong military force was mobilized. By October, Ukraine began losing ground in the region. On March 13th, Russia recaptured Sudzha. According to President Putin, the area is now fully under control. Some Ukrainian units had to retreat. Control of the Sudzha-Sumy highway passed to Russia, seriously hindering Ukraine's logistics. Zelensky had said that the lands in Kursk could serve as a bargaining chip in a possible peace agreement. But with the retreats, he lost a significant trump card in negotiations. So, let's turn back to the Ukrainian front. Russia now controls about 1/5 or roughly 20% of these territories. That's an estimated 112,000 square kilometers. Its main goal is to officially annex Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia into Russian territory. It wants the regions east of the Dnipro River to remain under its control. On the western side of the river, it aims to reduce Ukraine's weapon capacity. In November 2024, Ukraine captured 627 square kilometers, 569 in December, 427 in January 2025, 354 in February, and 203 in March. According to the US-based Institute for the Study of War, Russian advances have shown a downward trend over the past 5 months. The situation has now turned into a war of attrition. It's hard to talk about rapid advances or shocking land gains. Now, both sides are moving inch by inch on a 1,000-kilometer-long front line, like pieces on a chessboard. There's a line stretching from southern Kherson to northeastern Kharkiv. It's become a zone where trenches are woven like spiderwebs. Drones patrol the skies, and every step comes at a heavy cost. For Ukraine, this war is not just about land, it's also about buying time. Because Kiev wants to reinforce its eastern defensive line before any potential Trump-Putin negotiations. It has to show that resistance continues, and that it still has a seat at the table. But that's not easy. Ukrainian officials are now speaking openly. It's getting harder to stand against Russia's larger, better-equipped army. There's a shortage of soldiers and limited ammunition. Yes, there are plans to recruit new troops, but the uncertainty around service durations is significantly reducing the number of volunteers. Despite all these challenges, the war goes on. Throughout 2024, the Russian army made significant gains, especially in the Donetsk region. Last year, they captured around 4,200 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. Most of that was in Donetsk. Then, the advance toward Pokrovsk began. This is where the front line has seen the most dramatic changes in recent months. It took Russian troops a full year to advance about 40 kilometers westward. After months of clashes, Ukraine was forced to withdraw from Avdiivka, just north of Donetsk, in February 2024. This war has shown us just how important manpower is, and Russia has a clear advantage in that regard. According to Ukrainian military intelligence, around 620,000 Russian soldiers are deployed in Ukraine and in the nearby Kursk region. The Kremlin doesn't hesitate to send troops even for just a few meters of gain. They're advancing almost like human waves. According to Trump, it's unlikely Ukraine will return to its pre-2014 borders. Since the beginning of the war, we've heard this phrase over and over again. This weapon will change the balance on the battlefield, but the reality is very different. Because in a war of this scale, no weapon on its own has been able to fundamentally shift the course of events. The truth is, the only weapon that could reverse the situation is nuclear weapons. But nuclear arms are not a preferred option, because once the button is pressed, it starts a chain of destruction that no one can stop. Entire cities are wiped off the map, but the real victims are often not the soldiers, it's the civilians. Yes, war cannot be fought without weapons, but weapons also need to adapt. Systems that seem impressive at first gradually become familiar, and countermeasures are developed against their effects. This is exactly what happened in the Ukraine war. None of the weapons used on the battlefield alone managed to change the balance, because what was really needed was a holistic approach that could adapt the weapon to the battlefield. That's why the rhythm of this war has been shaped by how technology evolves to meet the needs of warfare. There are two weapons that both sides seem to be using effectively. Ukraine's drones and Russia's artillery. Flying shotguns, flamethrower drones, these are the new weapons of the battlefield. Over Ukraine's frozen ground, a drone glides silently toward a drone hunt. There's something new here. A double-barreled shotgun is mounted underneath the drone. The operator slowly aims the shotgun at the Russian drone scanning for targets. And bang! The drone hit by the shotgun crashes to the ground instantly. Many similar incidents have occurred. I can point to the footage we're watching now as examples. These images were shared by the 2nd Motorized Battalion of Ukraine's 30th Mechanized Brigade, fighting around Bakhmut. So how does it work? It has a recoilless system. While one barrel fires at the target, the other fires simultaneously to counteract the recoil. This way, the drone doesn't shake and stays stable. Instead of high-precision targeting, the shells are expected to spread toward the target and destroy it within a wide impact zone. But there's a problem. It lacks an automatic loading mechanism. So after firing, it has to be manually reloaded. Some compare this system to the Davis gun, developed before World War I by U.S. Navy Commander Cleland Davis. It was first tested in the 1910s. It was developed to reduce recoil, but it wasn't widely used in war because it was hard to reload. What really stands out here is that another new idea on the battlefield has now become systematic, using weapons mounted on drones to hunt other drones. It's quite a creative approach. Throughout the war, both Ukraine and Russia have used drones not just for reconnaissance or as bomb carriers. They're now equipping these machines with weapons, even molten thermite, the result flying shotguns and flamethrowers. What's interesting is that many of these fast new drone types in Ukraine are emerging from decentralized structures. Units, volunteers, small manufacturers, each one is developing their own projects and testing them on the battlefield. This massively accelerates the pace of change. Some Western defense analysts criticize NATO and Europe for focusing too much on high-tech. You know, as seen on the Ukrainian front, sometimes what's important on the battlefield isn't the level of tech. What really matters is how many there are, how quickly they can be mass-produced, supplied, and adapted to the field. Now let's talk about the fire-spewing drone. It's no longer just bombs falling from the sky, now it's fire too. In recent footage, a small Ukrainian drone approaches Russian positions. It literally shoots fire just above the armored vehicles and everything around it starts burning. Ukrainians are loading these incendiary munitions onto drones to fully disable Russian tanks that are no longer operational but haven't yet been destroyed. The goal is to make sure the enemy can't recover and reuse these vehicles on the front. This system is also used against tanks, positions, trenches, even wooded areas. It's estimated that Russia has lost over 11,000 tanks and armored vehicles since the start of the war. Some were completely destroyed, others just damaged. Some of those damaged vehicles are being pulled back for repairs. This tactic could ruin those plans. The munitions used are portable and practical. They weigh between 500 grams and 2.5 kilograms. Light enough for small drones to carry with ease. And each one costs only 20 to 30 euros. Up to 20,000 units can be produced per month and sent directly to the front. So how is the fire dispersed? The munition consists of metal fragments that burn at temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees. When metal and metal oxide combine, they generate extremely high heat. This process is typically used in heavy industry like welding train rails or cutting ship hulls in shipyards. The heat gets so intense it can melt steel. Russia prioritizes protecting its military vehicles, especially from explosions and shrapnel. To achieve this, they often use flammable materials like rubber. While rubber offers flexibility and protection against shrapnel impacts, it isn't resistant to high temperatures. flammable materials like rubber become more vulnerable to substances that burn or melt at extremely high temperatures, such as thermite. So, what's Russia's secret in artillery? September 7, 1812, the Battle of Borodino. A French officer in Napoleon's army, Baron Lejeune, describes that day as follows. Cannons rising from the enemy trenches tore through our ranks. It was a complete massacre. But, honestly, these words could just as easily belong to a German soldier in Stalingrad in 1943, or a Ukrainian soldier in the trenches of Bakhmut in 2023. Because in Russian military tradition, one thing has never changed: the power of artillery. In Stalin's famous words, artillery is the god of war. The Russians have fully embraced this motto. We're talking about a weapon they still hold in the highest regard. The first example of modern Russian artillery came in the 1916 Brusilov offensive. A massive artillery bombardment guided by new reconnaissance planes shattered the Austro-Hungarian lines. 26,000 soldiers were captured in a single day. In 1945, during the Soviets' final offensive on Berlin, they used over 10,000 artillery, mortars, and multi-barrel rocket launcher systems. It's believed that over 1 million shells were fired on the first day alone. But in guerrilla-style wars like those in Afghanistan and Chechnya, artillery was less effective. With the war in Ukraine, the Russian army returned to its classic strength. Today on the battlefield you can find both Soviet-era M30 122mm howitzers and modern Tu-S-19 Memsta-S 152mm howitzers. Modern multi-barrel rocket systems like the Tornado S are also deployed on the ground. These vehicles carry 12 rockets of 300mm and can reach up to 120 kilometers. Another system, the BM-27 Uragan, fires 220mm rockets up to 35 kilometers. The war in Ukraine isn't just fought at the front, it's also raging in factories. On one side, daily shelling, destroyed tanks, and burning vehicles. On the other, production lines working around the clock to replace these losses. And at this very point, the highest-ranking US general in Europe paints a striking picture before Congress. According to Christopher Cavoli, Russia is producing 250,000 artillery shells per month. That's 3 million per year. That's 3 times the combined capacity of the US and Europe. Washington has a plan, but it's still far from catching up to Russia. Currently, it can only produce 40,000 shells per month. The goal is to increase this to 90,000 by 2026. Zelensky had said that Russia is firing 10 times more shells than his country can, but artillery units have become easy targets for UAVs. On the Ukrainian front, drones are used both for reconnaissance and attacks. Once a target is identified, it's either hit directly or coordinates are passed on to artillery for counterstrikes. That's why no artillery battery can stay in the same spot for long. Despite all this, the role of artillery remains critical, because even though drones can strike, it's still artillery that clears the space needed for maneuver warfare. The US military has started learning this new reality directly from the field. Major General Rory Crooks, responsible for long-range artillery systems, highlights something important. Inactivity now means death. In an environment of constant surveillance, mobility and dispersed deployment have become vital for the survival of artillery units. This topic is also addressed in the U.S. 2025 Defense Authorization Act report. The war in Ukraine clearly showed how important mobile artillery systems are, because now there are drones in the sky at all times, and that's why stationary artillery batteries become easy targets. According to a report by the London-based Royal United Services Institute, Ukraine and Russia are now spreading their artillery over wider areas. Each battery is positioned in fortified emplacements hundreds of meters apart from each other. This reduces the impact of enemy counter-battery fire. Ammunition and supply vehicles are hidden far from the positions. Artillery units fire from the same location for limited periods and then change positions, because staying still means becoming a target for bombs. On the front line, both sides made heavy use of artillery. This situation forced not only the US but also Europe to increase ammunition production. Everyone realized the course of the war is also determined by stockpiles. Important lessons about the nature and future of modern warfare can be drawn from the Russia-Ukraine war. Ukraine took an innovative approach to drones, quickly adapting and developing UAVs through local producers and volunteers that suited field needs. Russia, on the other hand, adopted a war strategy throughout the conflict that relied not only on high technology, but also on quantity and sustainability. The most prominent factor in the field was the continuity of production capacity. It was clearly ahead in tanks, artillery shells, armored vehicles, and soldier numbers. It could sustain the war by replacing what it consumed. It also did not hesitate to use its numerical superiority in manpower. On many fronts in Ukraine, its human wave-style attacks drew attention. Although this strategy came at a high cost in casualties, it allowed territorial gains on certain fronts. Yes, this war has left behind important lessons for the future, and perhaps the most important one: only those who adapt best to the battlefield will survive.